Last night we received an email from Dina telling us how to dress today, and she said, just dress on brand. She said, if you wear a t-shirt when you speak, if it's a pro-life t-shirt, just wear a pro-life t-shirt, just dress on brand. My son asked me, what does that mean? And I said, well, your mom is a dentist, so if she was going to speak, what would she wear? And he said, scrubs. And I said, that's right, that's her brand. So what should I wear? And he said, a giant baby costume. So we're still working on it. I've got him back there working the camera today, but it's going to be a while before he moves into branding and marketing. I'm going to read you a quote by a guy named Cowboy Dwayne. This country is only as strong as the churches in this country. The churches are only as strong as the families that make up those churches. Those families are only as strong as the marriages that those families are built on. Yes, those marriages are only as strong and as good as the man that God built the marriages on. As goes the husband, so goes the marriage. As goes the marriage, so goes the family. As goes the family, so goes the church. As goes the church, so goes the country. Everything is built on the husband and the father. And this country is a failure today because the fathers and the husbands have failed. Now, whether our country is a failure today is a debate for a different room on a different day. But whether the leadership of men or the failure of men to lead has tremendous impact on the direction of marriages, families, churches, communities, and the country is not up for debate. And I would suggest that the absence of masculine leadership in the homes and the communities over the last several generations in the abortion debate, the passivity and silence of good men, the yielding acquiescence to the idea that abortion is a women's issue and doesn't affect men, is the reason we haven't yet been successful in ending abortion in our country. The current state of abortion in America is the product of failed masculinity. Passivity in the face of the slaughter of over 1 million of our babies every year is the failure of men to protect, to provide, to lead, to serve those entrusted to our service. Now, I recognize that in this audience and on this stage today, there will be a lot of good men doing great work in the fight for life. So let me be clear. I'm not talking about the policy and organizational leaders. That's incredibly important work, but there are roughly 125 million men in this country over the age of 18. And a Gallup poll released last June shows that 54% of men identify as pro-life. So that's about 67.5 million pro-life men in America. Now, for the sake of argument and setting aside egos, I'll give you 500,000 for policy, legal, and organization leaders in pro-life movement. So I'm talking about the other 67 million pro-life men in America. Passively pro-life men. Because we aren't going to win this war with just policy and laws, we have to change the culture so that abortion is truly unthinkable. Unless we change the culture, laws are just going to keep going back and forth in perpetuity, and that's not good enough. So how did we get to this point? Well, for 53 years, the abortion industry has done an amazing job at branding itself as a champion of women's rights. They did this in 2 ways. First, they made abortion about women's rights, about health care, about reproductive freedom, about bodily autonomy, about things that have nothing to do with men. And second, in order to be a champion, they needed a villain. And they made men that villain and built an entire fight around that. No uterus, no opinion. You just want to control women's bodies. You just want to force 10-year-old rape victims to give birth. Abortion doesn't affect men. If you're pro-life, how many kids have you adopted? I had someone comment that on one of my posts this week. And I responded that while the argument that in order to be pro-life you have to adopt all the kids is ridiculous, that I had personally adopted 3. And that got me called a Nazi and a pedophile. Men are the villain in abortion. We are the ones from whom abortion industry is saving women and championing women's rights. And good men hear these attacks and decide, you know what? It's easier to go play a round of golf than to sit here and listen to this craziness. The problem is that if we walk away from the fight doesn't stop. It just gets louder and bolder because they know it works. They can take out half the pro-life population in the fight by framing it as an issue that doesn't affect men. But abortion does affect men. Guttmacher reported this year that in 2024 there are 1.162 million abortions in America. That's 1.162 million fathers. Abortion affects men. 1 in 5 men will lose a child to abortion by the age of 45, as reported by Support After Abortion. Of those men, across ideological lines, 71% reported an adverse change after the abortion, and 83% agreed that they would have benefited from post-abortive resources. Abortion affects men. A recent study out of Denmark using socialized medicine to track 8,821 men who had lost a child to abortion found that men who lose a child to abortion are up to 4.5 times more likely to seek mental health professionals. They are 90% more likely to need antidepressants. They are 74% more likely to need prescription sleep aids and 79% more likely to need anti-anxiety medications. Abortion affects men. And remember, this is not self-reported. This is Denmark. Denmark is not a pro-life country. When I lost my first child to abortion, my freshman year of college, I ended up failing out of school 3 times. And 8 years later, I was homeless, unemployed, and at the end of a 7-year methamphetamine addiction, overdosing on a dirty hotel room floor and waiting for the police to arrest me for theft. Abortion affects men. And every single time I share my story of shame, of loss, of guilt, of regret, the regret associated with the failure to protect my child, every single time I have at least one man come up to me afterwards and say, I haven't told anybody this in 20 years or 30 years, but I lost a child to abortion. Sometimes it's men who fought against it like I did, and sometimes it's men who pushed for the abortion. It doesn't matter. The pain is the same, suffered in silence, believing that they are the only one, because they are told that abortion doesn't affect men, so it can't be that. But abortion does affect men, both directly and indirectly. Women who have abortions are 81% more likely to experience mental health problems and between 2 and 6 times more likely to commit suicide, not to attempt, to commit suicide. And as men, if we are sitting passively on the sidelines watching this happen to women, then we are complicit. And we are failing in our masculine role to protect, to provide, to lead, and to serve. Abortion affects men. Abortion is not just a women's issue. The real reason that the opposition is so forceful in shouting down the men is because they know the power that our voices have to end abortion. They know that as goes the man, so goes the country, and that if we can empower men to stand up and speak boldly and confidently for life, then we can end abortion. They know that if every single one of us, 67 million strong, boldly and proudly proclaims that we are going to fight to end abortion, that the next generations of young men and boys will see that example and aspire to live it. That if we reject silence and passivity, then the next generations won't even see it as an option. 54% of men in this country identify as pro-life. We have the numbers. We need to call them to action, and we need to give them something to do. We need to go on the offense. We need to play our message on repeat, that being pro-life, protecting the most vulnerable, is a necessary part of authentic masculinity. That you are not a real man if you support the killing of innocent babies in the womb, or if you are silent and passive in your opposition to abortion. And we need to be consistent in this messaging and this call to action in the face of the most violent opposition, because we all know the abortion industry isn't going to slow down, and neither can we. My friends, when we get strong men to lead this fight, not in place of the strong women who are already in it, but alongside of them, we will change this culture. And that is how we will end abortion. Thank you.